In the early days of America, as the colonies struggled to find their identity, one man's message swept through the land with remarkable fervor. That man was John Wesley, a humble English preacher and the founder of Methodism. Although he never intended to leave his mark on American soil directly, his teachings sparked a religious revival that rippled across the continent, inspiring countless Americans to re-examine their faith and paving the way for a profound transformation in both church and society. John Wesley was born in 1703 in Epworth, England, to a family deeply rooted in Anglicanism. His father, Samuel Wesley, was an Anglican priest, and his mother, Susanna, raised him in a strict yet compassionate environment. Growing up, Wesley experienced a spiritual journey that was far from straightforward. His early life included grappling with personal doubts and wrestling with questions about salvation and faith. But these experiences, rather than hindering him, shaped him into a determined and relentless seeker of God's truth. By the time Wesley arrived at Oxford University, he had already gained a reputation as a devout young man, committed to a rigorous schedule of prayer, fasting, and Bible study. Alongside his brother Charles and a small group of fellow students, Wesley founded what would come to be known as the Holy Club, a group dedicated to personal piety, service, and religious study. They were mocked as Methodists due to their methodical approach to faith. Little did they know that this mockery would give name to a movement destined to change the religious landscape of entire nations. In 1735, Wesley traveled to the American colonies as a missionary. The experience, however, was a difficult one. Wesley struggled with his role, encountering personal disappointments and conflicts with local congregations. He returned to England in 1738, feeling like a failure. Yet, during this period, Wesley experienced a transformative spiritual awakening, famously describing his heart as strangely warmed. This moment of renewed faith would mark the beginning of his life as an evangelist. With his brother Charles, Wesley began preaching throughout England in a manner that was revolutionary. Unlike the reserved Anglican services of the day, Wesley's preaching was fiery, emotional, and direct, drawing thousands from all walks of life. But while Wesley's efforts focused on the British Isles, his teachings were already echoing across the Atlantic. Many of the American colonists, feeling spiritually unfulfilled in the strict denominational structures of the day, were primed for Wesley's message of grace, salvation, and a personal relationship with God. Wesley's teachings on salvation and holy living would spark a new fervor in the colonies, inspiring a revival that historians would later call the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening was a monumental religious revival in America during the 1730s and 1740s, led by preachers like George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, and others who, influenced by Wesley's teachings, ignited the spiritual fire that Wesley had hoped for but had been unable to kindle during his brief missionary period. Whitefield, a contemporary and close friend of Wesley, carried Wesley's fervent message to America with exceptional passion, preaching to massive crowds across the colonies and drawing thousands to faith. Whitefield, known for his powerful and emotional sermons, drew heavily from Wesley's emphasis on personal conversion, salvation, and the idea that God's grace was available to all. His dramatic style, along with his message of heartfelt devotion, won the admiration and conviction of countless colonists. Wesley's influence spread as Americans heard of his emphasis on a deeply personal relationship with Christ, one that did not depend on rigid denominational structures or the ecclesiastical hierarchy. This was a radical departure from the established Anglican and Puritan traditions in America, which held to strict doctrines and a more formal approach to worship. Wesley's ideas encouraged a more democratized view of faith, one that emphasized individual conviction and spiritual transformation. The Great Awakening became a true awakening for America, calling people out of stagnant spiritual routines and challenging them to embrace a dynamic, personal relationship with God. As Methodism grew in popularity in England, it began to spread in America as well. By the 1760s and 1770s, small Methodist societies had sprouted up in various colonies, often organized by immigrants who had encountered Methodism in England or Ireland. Wesley, although still in England, took a keen interest in nurturing this growth. He sent lay preachers to America and even ordained ministers to guide these societies, a controversial act that would ultimately lead to a formal break from the Anglican Church. When the American Revolution broke out in 1775, Methodism faced a critical turning point. Wesley himself opposed the war, fearing it would lead to disunity and moral decline. However, the Methodists in America adapted to the political climate, and after the Revolution, the Methodist movement in America experienced an unprecedented period of growth. With Wesley's encouragement and support, Francis Asbury and Thomas Coke became the first bishops of the Methodist Episcopal Church in America, a newly established organization born out of Wesley's teachings. Asbury, an indefatigable preacher, rode thousands of miles on horseback across the young nation, bringing Wesley's message of salvation, personal holiness, and social reform to every corner of the expanding country. Under his leadership, the Methodist Episcopal Church flourished, appealing to the poor, the marginalized, and those in rural areas often neglected by other denominations. Asbury's dedication to Wesley's vision, despite the absence of Wesley himself, allowed Methodism to spread rapidly, eventually making it one of the largest and most influential denominations in America. But Wesley's influence in America extended far beyond church attendance. His teachings carried a powerful message of social responsibility that would become an integral part of American Methodism. Wesley himself was a passionate advocate for issues such as abolition, prison reform, and education, and he urged his followers to put their faith into action. He preached against slavery long before abolitionism became a widespread movement in America, calling it a scourge upon humanity and urging Christians to fight for the rights and dignity of every individual. Wesley's commitment to social justice resonated deeply with Methodists in America, who took up these causes with fervor. American Methodists, especially in the northern states, became some of the earliest and most ardent supporters of abolitionism. Methodist preachers and laypeople alike worked tirelessly to campaign against slavery, and their influence played a significant role in swaying public opinion. In fact, many Methodist churches were among the first to split over the issue of slavery, with the northern and southern branches of Methodism dividing in 1844, a conflict that foreshadowed the Civil War. Wesley's teachings on social reform extended beyond abolition. Methodists also spearheaded efforts in prison reform, education, and temperance. The Methodist belief in personal holiness led to an emphasis on moral living, which translated into support for temperance movements aimed at curbing the societal damage caused by alcohol abuse. Methodists built schools and founded universities, driven by Wesley's belief that education was essential for both spiritual and personal growth. The moral and social impact of Wesley's teachings was woven into the very fabric of American life, influencing the nation's values, laws, and institutions. The spread of Methodism in America would not have been possible without the dedication of the Methodist circuit riders. Inspired by Wesley's itinerant preaching, these hardy preachers traveled on horseback across vast and rugged territories, bringing the message of Christ to remote settlements and frontier towns. These circuit riders were often young, single men with a fierce commitment to spreading the gospel and a willingness to endure hardship and isolation. They preached wherever they could, from open fields to log cabins, reaching people who might otherwise never have encountered a church. The work of the circuit riders was instrumental in establishing Methodism as a dominant force in American religion. Their efforts mirrored Wesley's own journey across England, where he preached outdoors to thousands who had no access to a church. In the American context, the circuit riders made Methodism accessible to the nation's rapidly expanding frontier, ensuring that even the most isolated communities were part of Wesley's spiritual legacy. John Wesley never set foot in America again after his first, brief missionary journey. Yet, his legacy in the United States became more enduring and transformative than he could have ever imagined. His teachings inspired not only a religious revival, but also a movement that shaped American culture, ethics, and social conscience. Today, Methodism remains one of the most influential Christian denominations in the United States, and the impact of Wesley's teachings can still be seen in churches, charities, and universities across the nation. The core values that Wesley championed, personal faith, social justice, and a commitment to the common good, continue to inspire generations of Americans.